Simon Marks joins me now live from Washington, D.C., where have you got your head around this yet, Simon?
Well, it does occur to me, James, that never has a major international scoop fallen into the hands of a journalist with less work. I mean, imagine being Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein today. You know, the Washington Post guys who had to go to parking garages at 2 o'clock in the morning to meet Deep Throat, who spent months working away at it, trying to bring down the Nixon administration. And here's Jeffrey Goldberg with a major global scoop simply because the National Security Advisor of the United States, Mike Waltz, appears inadvertently to have dropped him into a Signal group chat. This is emblematic of what happens to a government when it is stripped of all competence, when a government is entirely staffed at senior levels by people who are hired because they are either proven Make America Great Again supporters of Donald Trump's political movement, or they're people who might have criticised him in the past but have publicly bent the knee before him and suddenly pledged their fealty to him. There are no restraining influences in this government. This we already knew. There are no adults in the room. There are no people with significant amounts of national security experience who can say, fellas, we can't discuss this on Signal. I mean, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. There are secure channels of communication within the American government specifically designed to avoid the prying eyes of the Chinese, the Russians, anybody else that wants to do the United States harm, maybe even the Houthis, from being able to monitor these kinds of communications. And so the idea that this took place, and it may not have been the first time, I mean, it didn't seem that these people, nobody in the chat, according to Goldberg's telling of events, even raised the question of whether they should be doing this on Signal. It almost seems like it was a perfectly normal channel of communication for them to be using. I mean, the Chinese and the Russians have got to be just, I mean, laughing as the day is long and presumably poring over secrets that have already leaked out of this government.
How? I'm going to ask you to get your scales out. And on one side of the scales is the egregious incompetence of what we're witnessing, as you've just articulated. And on the other, the content, albeit that the most damning elements of what Jeffrey Goldberg could see. Jeffrey Goldberg is the grown-up in the room who has declined to actually air those, which, of course, as we'll get on to, gives Pete Hegseth the opportunity to lie about what actually happened and to claim that there is nothing, or to essentially call Jeffrey Goldberg a liar. What's worse, the incompetence or the content? The context or the content?
Well, I think it depends where you're looking at it from. If you're looking at it from this side, the mere fact that they were doing it is catastrophic here in Washington, D.C. There are all sorts of calls for heads to roll. I think a lot now will hinge on the supine Republicans in Congress and whether they find a backbone and stand up to Trump and say, at least National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, formerly, by the way, one of them, has to go. I mean, are we going to see heads rolling? But if you're sitting in number 10 today, there are huge questions that arise from this. Can the UK continue sharing British intelligence with the Americans through its membership of the Five Eyes group? That's the group that brings the UK, the US, the Canadians, the Australians and the New Zealanders, the Kiwis, together in an intelligence sharing arrangement. There were already questions about how safe the other partners' secrets might be with US officials like Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, someone about whom there are enormous questions pertaining to her relationship with Russia. But this really raises, I spoke to one former senior official last night, and I said, how can the UK, for example, continue sharing intelligence with the United States? And flatly, the answer was they can't, they shouldn't, they mustn't. So there's big questions there. And also, if you look at the content of this, it also reveals further the Trump administration's inside attitude towards the UK and Europe. Because when JD Vance starts raising questions about whether it's the right thing to do, he says President Trump, should not necessarily have approved this action this early, because he points out only 3% of American trade passes through the Red Sea and 40% of European trade passes through the Red Sea. So he's worried that it's going to be difficult to explain why the US government is doing this at a time when President Trump is saying if Europe wants to help itself, it needs to do more to help itself in defense terms. Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, chimes in and starts making the argument that after the military action is over, possibly the United States is going to need to go to the Europeans and say, you owe us a bit of money for doing this because, most of your trade, the trade that passes through these shipping lanes, ends up in European shops and on European dinner plates and in European car plants. So this notion that they have definitely an antithesis towards Europe, but also view even military action against a group they define as terrorists through an entirely mercantile perspective is absolutely breathtaking.
Yes, I mean, it is hard to focus on the most breathtaking element of it, and that may render my next question unfair because I'm going to ask you to turn up with a traditional toolbox, entirely untraditional events. If this had happened a year ago, what would have happened next? What would the Department of Justice or the FBI or Congress, what would have what do you? And I know this is going to be slightly speculative, but it's a constitutional question, really. What would have happened?
Oh, absolutely. It's a totally constitutional question. And we're going to get an answer to part of that question on Wednesday, because before all this broke yesterday, the CIA Director John Ratcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard, the aforementioned Director of National Intelligence, they were due to be at a hearing on Capitol Hill on Wednesday talking about worldwide terror threats. Let's see if that goes ahead, because if it goes ahead, the Democrats in Congress will obviously assail them over what's taken place here. If this had happened in non-Trump times, if this had happened during the Biden administration or any administration prior to Trump won, immediately there would have been congressional hearings called. Immediately. Orders going out to make sure that no communications relating to this, no paper, no messages were deleted. Goldberg says Mike Waltz has his signal chat set so that the messages disappear after a certain period of time.
That's the Espionage Act straight away.
That's completely counter to American law.
Yeah.
Any government communication has to be kept and placed in the National Archives. You would have seen the Justice Department launching an immediate criminal investigation of everyone involved in this, by the way, including Goldberg, because it looks like he got out of the chat.
Yeah.
After he knew that these were the real principals that he was witnessing chatting among themselves. He got out of the chat after he'd verified that when the bombs started falling on Yemen, because otherwise he might be culpable under the Espionage Act as well. So there would be major process by the two co-equal branches of government alongside the presidency, Congress and the judiciary. And if that doesn't happen now, if literally we're waiting to see whether Donald Trump tolerates this or simply decides that Mike Waltz has got to go and that'll tidy it up and we'll move on to the next Trump-initiated distraction, that will tell you more about the collapse of American democracy that is ongoing here day by day, hour by hour.
All of which explains why Trump, like a cornered ferret, felt this morning that he had no choice but to claim that he knew nothing about the biggest story in the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, he always does that. He's never heard of anybody. He'd never heard of Project 2025. He had nothing to do with it. And then he came into office and suddenly he started implementing it sentence by sentence, page by page. And of course, he trashed The Atlantic as well in his first reaction to this, saying, yes, as far as he knew, it's a failing news magazine. I think Jeffrey Goldberg's name is obviously, it's already being dragged through the mud by Hegseth. I think Goldberg's going to have a very complicated few days ahead. He's a strong man and he's a very intelligent man, unlike many of the people within the Trump administration and on Capitol Hill that are undoubtedly about to be unleashed upon him. But Donald Trump is the leader of the ship. who sat in the Oval Office alongside Pete Hegseth a week ago as Hegseth waxed lyrical about the fact that under his leadership, nobody around the world takes the Defense Department for fools anymore. Well, I mean, that claim did not age well.
A master of understatement. That claim indeed did not age well. Final question. If the journalist who asked him this morning about it and opened the opportunity for him to deny, if he'd pushed back and said, and esprit d'escalier is a wonderful thing, we can all get everything 100% right with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. But if he'd pushed back and said simply, how can you not know, Mr. President? Who do you, in your administration, do you feel should have briefed you about this incredibly important national security story that the whole world is talking about? What time did you get out of bed this morning? I mean, it could be as rude as you want. But what would have happened to that journalist?
Well, it's the old Watergate question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Go back to Woodward and Bernstein. What did the president know and when did he know it?
Yeah.
I think, actually, I suspect that the president would simply have engaged in the usual load of old flannel.
Yeah.
And whether anything specific would have happened to that journalist would depend partly on the president's relationship with him and with the news organization that he represents. What we'll see, I'm sure, at the White House now is that every time Donald Trump appears in front of cameras over the next several days, the quote-unquote reporters in the room, and remember, many of these people are not reporters now, they are propagandists with pro-Trump far-right broadcast and streaming networks and websites and newspapers. They'll be the ones there chucking softballs at him again in a bid to give him an assist, because we're seeing that every single day at this White House. So the accountability that existed in the Woodward and Bernstein era is really threatened today by the way in which this White House games the outcome of events every single day when the president's on camera.
Wow. On a much much lighter note, I'll have a go at your first point about, has a journalist ever had a bigger story drop right into their lap? That was in December 2007. So a journalist on the news desk of the Daily Mirror who literally just picked up a randomly ringing phone and spoke to a woman who said, you know that bloke who disappeared in a canoeing accident a few years ago? I think I've just seen him on the website of an estate agent in Panama. So, it's not quite up there on an international scale, but it's why you should never, as you well know, Simon Marks, you should never walk past a ringing phone in a newsroom. Or indeed,
I will simply say, James, I will simply say, my signal is open.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon Marks. A lot of love coming in for you on my screen, as we would expect and as we always see, but cutting, absolutely to the heart of it as well, without any fear or favour.